So you found a skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, welcome to Dapper Reacts 75. We are once again taking a look at Eric Hovind and Vocab Malone's claims that the Bible doesn't endorse slavery, but even if it does, it wasn't harsh slavery, and even if it was harsh slavery, it's okay anyway. So, yeah, don't worry about it. Dr. Josh should be here at some point, I'm hoping. He was sent the link, so hopefully he's here.
I'm sure he will be.
Yeah, I expect him to be here.
It's he had a thing, and it was gonna take him probably right up to showtime, maybe a little bit past. So he'll be along at some point.
Plus, he has like 5 kids, so
6.
that's a lot.
6 now?
6.
Gee. Alright, well, I am currently joined by Vishanti, who has lovely feeders on. It's very nice. Because you guys hit her donations goal, which we don't separately track, but that's okay. I'm also here with Dr. Kip, Nobel Prize recipient in Hebreology, which is one of those Nobel Prize categories you probably don't know about, because it is highly competitive and also somewhat fictional.
It goes to another school, you wouldn't know it.
It's a Canadian thing, and there's no cash prize.
Yeah.
Or it's one of those non-cash prize cash award Nobel Prizes.
Worst kind of Nobel Prize.
So yeah, exactly. Yes, this is true.
All right, well, guys, we are doing the drinking rules. I have myself some Hard Mountain Dew Live Wire. It is a little early in the day for me, but that's okay. We also have a super chat from let's see, Supreme Scientist for $5 says Adam had to work serve God's plantation, aka Eden. Can you comment on Revelation 22, 3-5 though? Isn't this about slaves, doulos in heaven too? So yeah, we actually did talk about last time about the fact that the role of God versus the supposed planned role for Adam and Eve is very much that those are basically his agricultural slaves.
Oblites.
Yeah. Maybe serfs, if you want to go into a slightly more recent sort of idea. As far as Revelation 22, 3-5, I would probably have to pull that up, which it's not hard.
I believe that's in the New Testament.
It is, although, I mean, given that we are doing Eric Hovind, he's definitely going to accept the New Testament as part of, biblical thing. So let me take a look. And it was
other testament.
Yes. 3-5. So let's see. No longer will there be any curse, and his servants will serve him. Alright. Yeah, let's throw this over to I'm in English.
It's not like people being God's servants is a new concept.
No, I mean, it certainly is not. It goes.
What is it? It's Revelation
22.
Revelation
22.
What?
22, 3-5.
22 what?
3-5.
It's a lay stays. I'm just kidding.
Why they're so damn.
Isn't it nuts?
All right. So let's. All right.
His slaves.
Yeah, Duloy of. That's his slaves. Duloy of though.
Now it does use the verb latruo, which can mean serve for hire, like as like a hired or a paid.
One of the problems is that the
person, but not always either, right? It can be enslaved too.
One of the problems is that like the semantic range of doulos is usually captured by the English word slave, but you could also call someone who you just hired to do work for you by that word that is not a permanent worker for you and who is free to go after their contract, right? Like, if you hire a day laborer, you could reasonably call that person a doulos, which is confusing. Although I would say that, yeah, unless you have really good reason to not translate it as slave, the correct translation for doulos should usually be slave. Also, for $5, Winds of Shu says, how hard was it to figure out the grammar of any old language, especially any pictograph languages, and how it sounded lots of time? So that varies by language, right? And so what tends to happen is if we have, like, living relatives of the language, it can be easier. So it's a little bit easier to get, like, ancient Greek, because the Greek alphabet has been in continuous use. You can also look at things like poetry to see, like, okay, what words would have rhymed according to the people at this time writing the poetry. You can also look at things like, we actually have ancient grammar and pronunciation guides that people have written. Like, you can actually find, like, you know, old stodgy Roman senators writing about how to properly pronounce Latin, and then you can just read that and, like, okay, well, this is how this guy thought it was pronounced. He's old-fashioned, so that's probably how it was pronounced, like, a century before this was written by normal people. So there's that, but then again, it can also be virtually impossible, like Sumerian. One of the problems with Sumerian is we have a lot of what seem like homophones, but they're very distinct in writing, and almost all of our phonetic information comes from later Akkadian, long after Sumerian died out. So we don't know how accurate the Akkadians were in their teaching of Sumerian to each other in terms of the actual original pronunciation of Sumerian. So yeah, it varies. Sorry, Vishanti.
I was gonna respond to something in the chat. Star Song says that Hurricane Beryl is slated to cross their area in the near future, though it's supposed to be down to a tropical depression. Strength by that time, rain not so much, wind by then. And I want to share a funny anecdote. In this week's edition of Don't Mess with the Local Gods, so some brilliant mind decided that it would be a fantastic idea to put up a statue of Poseidon in Yucatan, where Maya people still live and still actively worship the rain god Chac, which is the analog to the Aztec god Tlaloc. And they were not happy that someone would put up a Greek god in a heavily Mayan area, and were protesting and getting really upset about it, and have been memeing the absolute hell out of Hurricane Beryl being punishment for putting up a statue of Poseidon in their territory.
There's some really good memes, especially if you know some Spanish.
Yeah, it is real good.
Hey guys, before we move on from languages, and while we're telling jokes, can I share a funny 1 minute video?
Yeah, as long as it's not going to get me a copyright strike. Hey, Dr. Josh.
No, it will not. I promise it won't. Hi, Josh. How are you?
Howdy. I'm all right.
Yeah, feel free to share that, and we'll go on to the vocab Malone telling us all about slavery and how the slavery in the Bible is actually not very harsh. You guys, it's totally fine. Because remember, the big thing about slavery is not anything about consent or freedom or anything like that. No. It's how nice you are. Oh, you can't?
Because I'm on Firefox. Yeah.
Oh, well. Dr. Josh, how you doing?
Oh, well.
I'm okay. You guys doing all right?
I'm doing just fine. I've got myself a nice beverage. We've got a couple super chats. I was talking about Sumerian without you here, and just pointing out that you can correct me, but I was pointing out that because most of our phonological information comes from Akkadians who were writing this stuff down long after Sumerian ceased to be a spoken language, it's harder to reconstruct its exact phonology because we don't know how accurate they were when talking about how to pronounce Sumerian. And that I was going to run by you, so that way I didn't lie to people accidentally.
So that's complicated. So we do have a lot of obviously Sumerian texts from when it was still a living language. The bulk of them, from a literary standpoint, obviously come from later. And yes, certainly, bilingual texts are a lot of the ways that stuff gets reconstructed. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as, not hopeless isn't the right way, but certain, like, obviously Pascal Adinger, who is sort of a deity, in the field has a whole different set of vowel pronunciations that he puts forward for cuneiform signs in many cases that sort of buck against the norms, and so yes, it is obviously debated. A lot of those, particularly the vowels pronunciations, are debated. So,
and real quick, we have a $5 super chat from Savage Pinnipedisaurus Cobra, which says, "Getting a fundamentalist value consent challenge level impossible." Yeah, there does seem to be a theme there. But hey, you know what? We're gonna hit play on this video, and we're gonna see what Vocab Malone has for us. Now, we already went over the first graphic that we're gonna see last time to point out how his definition of harsh slavery actually very, very well follows what biblical slavery is, at least when you're not dealing with Hebrew debt slaves. But, of course, apologists like to take in rules for Hebrew debt slaves and then just apply them to biblical slavery broadly as if they counted for all slaves, which is just a lie.
Oh, I think I need to say this. Yeah, I think I need to say this. Josh left a little early last week, but the craziest thing happened, Josh. After you left, the guys in the video started to actually talk about slavery.
Yeah, if you can believe it. So they're going to.
I do want to point out that Assyriologists are never early or late. We leave precisely when we intend to.
They're like wizards that way. And for €5, the South Geek X says, "Yay, I adore this trio. Heart plus Dapper is here." Yes, I am here. Which is cool too, I guess. Hit like, everybody, and let's get started. All right, here we go. Now that the South Geek X has commanded us, we must get started.
Now, let's compare, as Veda does when he talks about this, characteristics of harsh slavery.
He made up a whole category called harsh slavery, so that you know it's not regular slavery. It's not basic level slavery. It's super hyper advanced.
Right.
It's totally a distinction that the Bible makes.
It's very interesting to me. This is the second time that I've seen this. And I mean, I feel like I see a lot of apologists
I feel like
in their presentations of slavery. But Dr. Carmen Imes at Biola did something similar. And I've just put the finishing touches on a response to an interview that she did on slavery, which Megan is working on publishing. So that should be coming out soon on our channel. But she had a similar thing, right? And this is the subtle way that apologists try to allow for some of the bad parts of slavery. I don't know if they do this intentionally or not, but it's like they're allowing for some of the bad stuff, but then they tack on other things that are really bad. So she did it, for example, with violence in the conquest narratives, something that I'm sure Kip is getting a little loath to talk about at this point. But she says they weren't commanded to go cut off their thumbs and cut off their noses and cut them off at the knees. And so if she can tack on these things that are really, really bad, it just makes murdering them sound not so bad, right?
Yeah, they didn't torture and murder them; they only murdered them.
Right.
Okay.
So that's sort of what I see happening in these cases here.
It's this weird idea that if it's not as horrible as it possibly could be, then I guess it makes it okay. Which nope, that's not how anything has ever worked for anyone ever. I mean,
restricted from education. So if I kidnap someone, put them in my basement, right? But I allow them to have access to education, does it make it better? I did that. I don't think I understand the rationale here.
I guess it's better if you kidnap someone, you give them some reading material than if you don't, but that doesn't make kidnapping them okay. It's one of those I guess if I had to be kidnapped, I'd rather be kidnapped by someone who's going to leave me something to do in my captivity. But the not kidnapping option,
kidnapping.
Yeah, the not kidnapping option was always there, and it's the one we should go with, right? We don't need to argue over who was the least onerous kidnapper. We can just say kidnapping is bad and you shouldn't do it.
Bad. Yeah.
We got a super chat from Starsong for $5. It says, "Tell Dr. Josh, don't fear the not a linguist dinosaur. He's talking." Okay, Josh, you're not allowed to be afraid of me. Jake, insert clever Dapper inside joke here. Nelson, who's been a member for 18 months and is at the Saropsid level, sends a Godzilla, a Murphy, and a Ghidorah, so we'll drink, emoji, and says, because I have a nice glass of Glenlivet on the rocks. Ooh, very nice.
Oh, listen.
I'm a little jealous.
Listen, you guys. Okay. I am drinking water today because my new best friend, Dr. Joel Carrico, was at my house last night, and he brought with him a sampling of his Scotch collection. He brought 9 bottles of Scotch to my house last night. It's
sick flex,
and
sick flex,
and he was here until midnight. So water it is, you guys.
Fair enough. All right, here we go.
That is regulated in Old Testament. We can't deny that it's there. It's obviously there. Number one, you have...
Hey, that's true. Take a drink. That's more than I've heard from some people.
Have a situation where the slave owners have complete rights over the slave.
Really,
and, go to the antebellum South.
rolling in with that
being able to
self-aware wolves thing there, huh?
Yeah. Of course, here's the thing.
Hey, Josh. No, sorry. You say your thing, and then I have a question.
I was just going to point out that, yeah, the slave owners have complete rights over their slave was not actually true in the antebellum South.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I would, encourage the urban apologist to go and do some reading on the laws in the antebellum South, because, for example, if a slave owner were convicted of doing anything more than giving moderate correction to a slave, especially if he killed him, the penalty would be as if he had killed a free white person. So, like this idea that you have complete rights in the antebellum South, according to the law, it's just nonsense, right? That's not the case. Now, obviously, and this is maybe the important point, is that just because the law says that something can and cannot be done does not mean that it is done that way, right? This is why I think it's so dangerous for these apologists to be defending something that is not that dissimilar in the laws from what we saw in the antebellum South.
Yeah. And that's one of the things is like, remember, we're looking at the laws in the Bible. We're not looking at the actual treatment because we don't have any information about that, really. We don't have accounts that are like first or even like secondhand accounts of slavery in like the early Iron Age. We just don't. And so all we can do is look at one, first of all, the laws in the United States in, the antebellum South. Those were actually supposed to be enforced. They often weren't. But on the other hand, the laws in the Torah, it's not even clear that anyone at the time that they were written could have even conceived of the idea that these would actually be enforceable laws. This was more of a prestige thing to show how enlightened our society is because we don't treat our slaves harshly like those other people might. And like, yeah, okay, so we're comparing laws on the one hand that were almost certainly never actually followed and weren't even really meant to be, with laws that were at least meant to be followed, but then often weren't. And you don't come away with the idea that the Bible has an unambiguous advantage over the laws of the antebellum South. At least I don't. We do have a couple things. Zerolon, who's been a member for 8 months and is at the Tetrapod level, says a Dapper stream where I can't roll a nat 1. That's true. Yeah, you can't roll a nat 1 today. You sure rolled a whole lot of them on Wednesday, though. Jeez. Zerolon did my my Power Rangers actual play live stream on my other channel, and he has a tendency to roll really badly. But that's okay. Then Predictable Mutation, Thick Tunicate also gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. I'll take some drinks, and Kip can go on about that.
I was just going to say, I think for the remainder of this video, I'm just going to start referring to the urban apologist as the dog whistling apologist.
Ooh. Okay. Like it. Here we go.
And even rape them. And then you ask yourself, how could any Christian support such an institution? My goodness. We should not, and they should not have. So,
hey, Josh, I feel like I read in your book that there were 3 categories of slavery that you wanted to talk about in the book, and did so consistently. One of them was debt slave, and another one of them was like chattel slave for labor. What was that third one?
Sex slavery?
Okay. Now, in that situation, is the consent of the person in that situation very important to anyone? other than the person in that
Always
situation.
Dapper Dinosaur. Always. It was always consensual.
Is it?
They always ask permission before. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only time, even for like free women, where consent was considered, was if they were going to be punished, right? If it was adultery, if it was considered rape, right? So if they actively fought back, right, then or cried out for help, then they would say, well, they didn't give consent, and then they wouldn't be punished the same as the man, right? So consent was factored in at that point, but not so that the crime could be considered against them, because it wasn't, obviously. It was just, should we punish them or not, right, for this? So yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that at least in terms of how we conceptualize various sex-based crimes today, the biblical slavery does not escape the charge of allowing this.
No, and I think.
But listen, you guys.
Oh, go ahead, Kip. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I have been told that even though it looks like the Holy Spirit just did his thing, and boom, Mary was pregnant. I've been told we can know that she was fully consenting because she sang a song afterwards.
We have a couple things. Arter Ames, who's been a member for 12 months, thank you very much, and is at the Amnient level, says, why is evolutionary psychology not considered legitimate? Is it too prone to bias, too hard to test, or too vague? Could it improve any legit info? So it's a bit off topic, so I'll try to answer succinctly. The problem with evolutionary psychology is it generally just proposes a bunch of post hoc rationalizations for current human behavior in current human societies, and then just kind of pretends to know what selection pressures were active like 100,000 years ago, without ever actually attempting to demonstrate that those selection pressures are there, or that the evolutionary responses to them are in fact the explanations for modern human behavior. And so it basically just turns into a bunch of ways to justify the current way that various people act, usually inappropriately, and then just say, yeah, but it's just evolution, so what are you going to do? Without ever actually providing the actual science that could back up, right? Like, there's not an analysis of like, well, here's how we can tell that, human females 100,000 years ago were under this selection pressure, resulting in this behavior right now that's currently maladaptive given the current dating landscape. Like, yeah, no, that's never actually done. They just kind of say it, which basically just makes it not science. Now, is it the case that human behavior is affected by human evolution? I mean, obviously, all animals have their behavior affected by evolution. However, if you want to make a claim that this particular behavior has been affected by this particular selection pressure because of this particular time in the evolutionary history, you have to do a whole lot more than just make a story that kind of sounds plausible. There you go. That is my quick response to evolutionary psychology. And yeah, it is basically bunk. Let's see. Katie, no longer pristine. Yep, Lewis, for $5 says, because
just say the word vagina. Just do it.
Katie, no longer pristine vagina, Lewis, for $5 says, because random Diablo Critic reference nicknames could be a thing. Yes, they could. They absolutely
should be
I'll
a thing.
allow that.
All right, here we go.
Slaves are restricted from education. That means obviously no Bible. People talk about, the Bible was forced
Okay,
upon
you know
me.
what? That just gave me an excuse to talk about this. Let me just pull up my soapbox real quick and step up on it. So, when we talk about having a government, for instance, America, where I live currently, our ideal right now is to have a secular government. Meaning, not that people who participate in the government have no religion. It means that you don't bake those religious tenets into the laws. Okay? So when he's like talking about education and goes, therefore no Bible, honey, teaching your specific book always comes at the exclusion of all the others. And just because you think Mr. whatever his name is, Sausage Fingers, thinks that his book is the right one, doesn't give it automatic priority. And it's certainly not a science textbook in any conceivable way. It is not a mathematics textbook. It is sometimes useful for history. Sometimes it is useful for poetry. It's useful for understanding a culture and a time period. So there are things about it that you can use in an educational setting, but you shouldn't be teaching its theological principles in a school, right? And there was a discussion in the chat about who should be able to vote. Everyone should be able to vote. Period. Just because you don't like their religious tenets doesn't disqualify them.
I'm okay
They
with
Not
the age
women,
limits.
though, right?
Yeah,
Just
no,
They
not-
can
not
vote
women.
whatever values they want to, but their values that are based on a theology shouldn't be baked into the laws. So I get really frustrated at people who think they're just excluding extremist Christians from causing damage to our civic structure, when actually what ends up happening is you go, oh, well, I just think that religious people who vote based on their religious tenets shouldn't be allowed. That eliminates a lot more people than extremist Christians. Congratulations, you just took away the entire Jewish voting bloc. The entire bloc, because Judaism requires the termination of a pregnancy when that person's life is in danger. That is quite literally part of our religious structure. So there's a reason that we vote to allow people to get abortions whenever they want, whenever they need. And if you're like, well, that's religiously motivated, you shouldn't be able to do it. Or if you go, well, I am now the arbiter of people's religions, and what I deem satisfactory now goes for everybody, despite me not belonging to any of them. That's not how this works. You don't get to tell other people how to do their own religion. You don't have to like it, and you don't have to participate in it. But you don't get to tell them, well, according to my standards as an outsider, no one cares. It's not relevant. Jog on.
We have a $1.99 super chat from Rochina out of all over Keller that says, Guten Morgen, everybody. AIG is a bag of dicks, which yes, they are. I'll take a drink for that.
Guten Tag.
Yay.
Is this not more anymore where I am?
I'm just amused by the implication here. He didn't say it, but he's thinking it, right? He's thinking that all those Hebrew slaves, unlike the slaves in the antebellum South, had access and were learning the Bible.
First, there was no such thing at the time, and second, they were absolutely not doing it. No one,
Right.
I guess I can't say no one, right? In the entire history of slavery in Iron Age Levant, was there someone whose job was to work in the library? Yeah, sure, probably, I guess. But that would have been vanishingly rare. The average slave was just going around doing household, agricultural, or what we might consider industrial type work, right? Oh, there's a tiny larval human.
Yay!
You say
Oh.
hi?
It's a small human. Oh.
Oh, hi.
Just woke up.
I heard that. Hi.
Mhm. So, yeah, the slaves of the Iron Age were not going around becoming scholars in the various scriptures. And of course, at the time that they're imagining this slavery taking
Not
place.
the Bible.
Right. Well, that's one of the things I was going to say is the time frame that they're imagining this slavery is before most of what we now consider the Bible was even written in the first place. Because that they're taking.
I'd go so far as to say all of it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're taking the chronology of the the handing down of the law to Moses at face value, which I don't think I need to tell my audience, but yeah, no, that's not how it actually happened. The Torah was not actually at least the law code. Well, none of it, but the law code especially was not handed down on a mountain to Moses.
American slaves. That's not true. By and large, it was don't read, and if you're going to hear it, only hear the sections we're going to give you, because they understood the Bible was a book of liberation.
Okay, so that is one of those things there's some truth and there's also some falsehood. People probably know about the so-called slave Bible, which was a Bible that seemed to remove anything that was very easy to apply to a pro-liberation idea. But the thing is, it also was not widely circulated at all, ever. It was the pet project of one guy that didn't really go anywhere. Instead, what generally was done is, what he said. They just didn't teach the slaves to read. And in fact, at some point, it did become illegal in the United States to teach them to do so. And then yeah, they were preached to with cherry-picked bits of the Bible. That is accurate. Because it is also the case, right? Like, I don't want to downplay the degree to which the Bible has, in the past, formed, part of the motive and part of the, sort of the proof text for abolitionist sentiments. You can find that in there if that's what you're looking for. Which is why the abolitionists
But that's not part of the design, right? Like,
right,
that's not...
No one in the Bible...
That's
No one
not
wrote the Bible.
That's
Why aren't we
why the book
talking-
was written.
Why aren't we talking about the slave Bible?
We just were.
No,
They have a copy at
when
the
we bring
Museum
up
of the
this whole
Bible,
thing
by the
about
way.
like biblical slavery, and they're talking about education is restricted, so that means it's harsh. Well, that means antebellum slavery isn't harsh slavery and isn't that bad because slave Bible.
Well, the thing is that it is true that there was a de jure restriction on education of antebellum slaves in the United States after a certain point. I don't remember when that law actually started going into effect in various states. Because remember, it also wasn't
Didn't
like a
vocab
federal law.
Nolan just talk about education and then say that means no Bible?
Yes, but he was talking specifically about the slaves. And yeah, he's now then also going on to talk about they were only given bits of the Bible, which, yes, he's not doing a very good job of keeping his ideas straight. We got Joshua Geese who's gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships, and for $6.99 Beaver Bucks, Olivia Williams says, "Let's celebrate my start of 4 weeks vacation, vacations. Is that like a staycation? There's like an extra. Anyway, there's a Ghidorah in there, so we'll take a drink. I'm gonna take 6 drinks."
But I do want to point out that the way that this gets misused, primarily in my experience, is when an apologist will say, well, wait a minute, if the slave Bible is removing Leviticus, right? If Leviticus isn't in there, isn't this supposed to be the big passage in Leviticus 25, 44 to 46? That would be like, oh, so pro-slavery. So if it's not in there, by their logic, it must follow that it's not promoting chattel slavery, right?
Yeah.
Or endorsing chattel slavery.
Or
Which,
maybe it was just
sorry,
easier to
guys.
cut out an entire book than to chop it into tiny little
Right,
sections.
exactly. Like, I mean, the assumption here is that the people that are cutting out these passages are like proper exegetes, right? And they're going into the text and saying, oh, I know what this says, or that they even know about this verse, right? What they're cutting out is the goddamn Exodus story.
Right.
I mean, like,
exactly.
this is not rocket
No,
science,
right.
people.
They just don't also
God.
want to have to think about how to incorporate the later pro-slavery aspects of the legal code when they can just put Deuteronomy in there instead. And then you just don't have to worry about
Yeah.
it. Right? Like, it's the same way that, like, the Apocrypha got removed from the Protestant canon. It's not like they were going through with, like, a scalpel and removing the parts that they didn't like from the Apocrypha. They were just like, no, we're just not going to print it anymore. There you go. It's easier to just not print the whole thing. All right, here we go.
Now, it wasn't in the States, Eric, but there is something called the Slave's Bible. And you can go to the Bible Museum in D.C. there, and you can actually see a
I call that a prediction from Dr. Josh right there.
copy of
Good
it.
job.
This Slave's Bible. And why would you have to have a Slave's Bible? Meaning, why would you have to take out parts of the Bible if the Bible's just pro-slavery? Because the Bible's not pro-slavery. That's why.
No, it's because the Bible is a
It's for
broad
liberation,
set.
honey. That's what they were taking out.
The thing is, look, the Bible is a broad book, and if you want to find a message in it, you probably can. If your goal is to just
Yeah.
find a text that seems to say what you would like the Bible to say, and you're willing to ignore things like wider context, historical context, which at the time almost certainly wouldn't have been available to any slaves anyway. It's not like there were too many slaves who were studying, like, ancient manuscript evidence or Bronze Age and Iron Age archaeology. That wasn't an option exactly for anyone, not just the slaves. Yeah.
It's so funny
It's very easy
that
to find
these
whatever you want.
chuckleheads. It's so funny that these chuckleheads are just they don't seem to grasp that when you remove the liberating elements from the Bible, you're still left with
A much larger
Right?
set of
Like-
pro-slavery ideas.
it's not like they were left with nothing, right? It was. Does that not? That somehow doesn't compute.
Yeah.
With them, that
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a
it
very
wasn't
strange
the
argument.
slavery part that they cut out of the slave Bible. It was the liberation part.
Yeah.
Like, I don't get
Yeah.
why
Yes.
he thinks this is
But
a
they still
gotcha.
had they still had a pretty sizable text left, right? It wasn't like
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like just a little sliver of the Bible left after we removed all the liberating bits. No.
Yeah.
And look, like I said, the reason they did this is specifically because those bits were easy to turn into an anti-slavery rhetoric. But again, that you can take parts of the Bible out and turn them into something is not the same thing as what is the consistent message of any one given part of the Bible, right? Like, the law codes of the Old Testament consistently say slavery is okay by allowing for it with various rules. You don't make a rule about how to appropriately do a thing if that thing isn't okay according to you. Similarly, when you get to the New Testament, there is no condemnation, right? There's admonitions to be a good slave master and a good slave, but the only reason to do that is if you expect that to be a thing, and
If you
the
expect
existence
the
of that is a
institution of
problem.
slavery to be a thing, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you want to say, hey, but this is a bad institution, then you don't tell people to go be good slaves and good slave masters. You tell slave masters, hey, release your slaves, and you don't tell the slave to do anything because they shouldn't be existing under your paradigm. Got a couple more things. Savage Pinnipetasaurus Cobra for $2 says, objection, assumption of univocality.
Objection sustained.
They definitely are assuming that. I would say that I think I can assume univocality within the span of like a chapter or two in most cases. I think that's probably a reasonable thing for me to do. And then Savage Pinnipetasaurus also gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships, and Dark Law Dragon, who's been a member for 24 months, sends a membership milestone chat that has all 3 of the kaiju emoji and a drink emoji. So I will hit play and take some 6 drinks while the thing plays.
You had to take out the parts that weren't and keep the parts out of context and make it seem like it is pro-slavery. Well, that's what the slaves' Bible did. The
Funny
slaves
how
restricted
people
to
keep
their
noticing
identity.
that it's pro-slavery with the unedited version.
Yeah, what were those parts before you edited them, if they weren't pro-slavery? Or, sorry. Roshana Out of All Over Color for $4.99 says, I mean, the Bible advocates for furries if you look hard enough. Sure, I'm sure you could find a biblically based, out-of-context set of passages that you could apply to being pro the modern idea of furries. Something that definitely did not occur.
Nebuchadnezzar was turned into a furry.
There you go.
Right there in the book of Daniel.
Yep. I mean, it was a punishment, but...
This is why, in a lot of these colonial powers
really
who have...
It's really hot in that part of the world, so like if you have to run around in a fursuit, like, playing.
I gotta say, I did actually once, just for Halloween, as the 4th Doctor, and I realized every single planet that guy must have gone to was frigid, because holy crap, is that a lot of fabric and a lot of layers, and it is a hot costume to wear, and I was like, wow, good thing he was never going to, like, Venus or anything.
Yeah, that's the thing about cosplay that people don't think about, is you become quickly very aware of the characters that have a million layers or real thick scarves or gloves or whatever, and it's like, oh, this looks really cool, but I'm miserable.
Yeah. Or alternately, the ones who are basically wearing chainmail bikinis and you're in a, hotel lobby that's set to 68 degrees Fahrenheit and it's a little on the chilly side.
Which, honestly, that would be a blessing because most hotel lobbies are roasting. So, it's the panel rooms that get cold.
Star Song, $5. According to walkfree.org slavery index, the U.S., even though it's illegal, has an estimated 1.1 million slaves. I mean, that wouldn't entirely...
The 13th Amendment.
Well, yeah, if you count prisoners who were forced to do labor, I mean, it's a much, much, much higher number, and I would say at that point...
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it would be a reasonable thing to do. At that point, I think the United States probably has the majority of the world's slaves. If you
we have the highest carceral rate of any nation.
Yeah, the United States has like 25% of the world's prison population. It's ridiculous. Scoop23 et al. For $5 says, this all boils down to literalists can't accept the Bible doesn't have one unified viewpoint. And also want to reject the literal meaning of big parts of the text. Because, of course, like I've said many times, there's no such thing as a biblical literalist. There are people who trick themselves into thinking that they're biblical literalists, but no one actually takes the whole thing literally. One, I mean, you can just watch them ignore parts of the Bible they don't like the windows of heaven or the pro-slavery aspects. But two, the Bible can't be taken literally because it contradicts itself. It can't all be true in the same way, literally, at the same time. Matthew K., who's been a member for a month and is at the annual level, says, I think we all deserve to see the dinos versions of everyone on screen. With a Godzilla, a Mothra and a Ghidorah, and an AIG is a bag of dicks emoji, and then a For the Empire. So we will take a drink, and also, yes, For the Empire. That's the Klingon Empire, and in case anyone is wondering.
slaves, they didn't want their slaves to
Naturally.
get baptized.
Kapla.
Why? Because then they would have to see them as
Kapla.
brothers in Christ, and that would entail freedom. So they
Okay, I can't say that didn't happen, but by and large, Christianity was more often forced on U.S. slaves than it was like they were restricted from joining Christianity. Now, that's not to say that none of them made an actual conversion to Christianity. I don't know. I wasn't there. Many of them stayed Christians after they were freed anyway, so whatever. But yeah, it was far more common for Christianity to be imposed on slaves in the United States than for them to be restricted from joining the religion. Now, in part, a lot of that is because, remember, one of the fictions that slave owners in the United States were telling themselves with this whole idea of slavery was really for the benefit of the slaves, because you were taking them in and civilizing them and bringing them to, you're going to save their souls by bringing them into Christianity. And really, if you didn't do this, then they would have just died in their sins over in Africa of malaria, while never having learned about the wonders of agricultural farming at an industrial scale, I guess. And so
That level of paternalism. I'm going to just step away for a moment and refresh my coffee.
Okay, yeah, it's extremely gross. But the thing is, you have to understand that is what they were. That is how they excuse their own taking of slaves, because from a very early time, it's been very clear that like no one wants to be a slave, and so it's a kind of a weird thing to do to someone else. And so cultures that have had slavery have always had some kind of excuse, like, well, hey, they shouldn't have lost that war. Or like, oh, hey, we're helping to civilize them. Or like, oh, hey, they've got this racial inferiority that we're just trying to address, And so, yeah, that is one of the reasons why, to this day, one of the most heavily Christian demographics in the United States is African Americans. It's not because they were restricted from joining Christianity, but they did it anyway. That is not why. Dutch Tunicate Demonic Selection, who's been a member for 2 months and at the tetrapod level, says the U.S. prison system is run by AIG, and using the AIG as a bag of dicks emoji. Take a drink. Not literally, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty bad. Roshan out of all over Keller for 199 says Adam didn't die in a day. That's true. He died long after God said he would, which makes what God said would happen not what actually happened. So,
there was lots of rules against even missionaries baptizing slaves, all kinds of crazy stuff. And then, of course, you have the fact that in a lot of these systems and societies, it's not optional and it's permanent.
If slavery were optional, I would argue it's probably not slavery that you're thinking of. You're probably thinking of like volunteer work. Yeah,
this is the issue that I think so many apologists should just take a step back and think about. Debt slavery in the ancient Near East was, like, from a legal standpoint, considered voluntary in most cases, right? Be it on the part of the person who was, selling themselves into debt slavery, or from signing a contract, knowing that debt slavery could come from defaulting on that loan, or from the paterfamilias, selling someone in the household into debt slavery. All of those things would have fallen under the category of like volitional. Right? And I think what they do is they confuse that sort of legal volition with, wanting to do it, right? Having it be an option.
Right.
Because like 3 weeks in, right, I mean, like 3 weeks in to debt slavery, Frank, the debt slave, can't turn around and go, you know what? Not for me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and bounce.
Yeah.
Right?
Here's my 2 week notice.
Not gonna happen. So I'd like to know what he means by that. That the option. What was the option?
Ultimately, you can kind of compare it to like, hey, is it optional when someone becomes homeless because their house is foreclosed on because they lost their job and couldn't continue to pay their mortgage? Well, in a certain sense, you can say, well, they signed the mortgage contract, I guess, but does that mean they chose to become homeless as a result of these circumstances? No.
Well,
I mean, yeah, some of them might.
According to our very legitimate Supreme Court, being homeless is illegal now. So,
well, can be made illegal. They didn't declare it illegal everywhere. They did leave it up to places to make it illegal.
I live in LA where it is de facto illegal.
Yeah.
Listen, all the legal
that-
specialists, they all agree with me that it should go to the States. Okay, they're all from all around the world, internationally. They all agreed with me. They said, Donald, you have the best golf swing, not like Sleepy Joe. Okay, not like Sleepy Joe. Best golf. Couldn't even hit the ball 50 yards, okay?
All right, so we got a couple things. Mr. Cliff for £2 says moo 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 with 2 cow emojis. Thank you very much. And then also, I gotta say, we got 146 people watching, which is amazing, but we've only got 65 likes, which means once again, unfortunately, I have to say, I like less than half of you, half as well as you deserve. So let's hit that like button so you don't get Bilbo'd again.
Now, it's ultimately because the slave is viewed as property. Now, this has always been the case throughout many.
You got it.
Hey,
he
you
got
figured
it
it out.
right.
Take a drink.
Congratulations.
It's just that the Bible also explicitly calls the slave your property, your silver, your money. These are all sort of idea. And now, granted, it doesn't say the same thing about all the slaves, right? It doesn't say that about the debt slaves, but that's the thing. You don't get to import the regulations about debt slaves and then just pretend that those are the regulations for all slaves in the Bible, because they are explicitly not. The Bible has a separate category for foreigners who are taken into slavery, whether that be because they were sold into slavery or because they were war captives who were taken as slaves, which were the two big ways that you got foreigners as slaves. You could either buy them from foreigners, or if you were at war and they lost, well, now the population of the city that you just took can be sold into slavery. And those people do not have the same protections as Hebrew debt slaves. And we don't get to pretend that that distinction doesn't exist, and that all the slaves are going to be set free on like the 7th year or something, because they absolutely weren't. It's explicit that the debt slave goes free, and that the foreign slave that you acquire from the nations around you is your property and can be inherited, and that their children are your property, and you can leave their children to your children, and all that great stuff. And I say great, very much facetiously in this case. Okay.
Oh, man.
Oh, DM Google the bunker
Thank
wing.
you, knee/annoying newsletters, for reminding me of the greatest Seal song ever. Kiss from a Rose.
And DM Google the bunker wing for $2 says, in before the bell riots, Godzilla's will take a drink, and yes. Dr. Josh, are you getting ready for the bell riots coming up in September?
Maybe.
Okay. See, unbeknownst to most people, Captain Cisco came back in time for the year 2024 in the month of September, accidentally killed the original Bell, took his identity, and then started the Bell riots that then resulted in great reforms in the United States government. And it's going to be a big thing in September, the Bell riots, because Star Trek is real history.
Yeah, and
Nice.
also we only have a few months left for Irish reunifications.
That's true,
And
yeah. The
I
Irish
won't get on
reunification of 2024, according to season 1 of Star
2024.
Trek The Next Generation, yeah. So,
Societies. You go back along the Tigris and Euphrates, Mesopotamia, now Egypt, Indus Valley, India, China, all had slavery. Doesn't make it right or okay. It means it's sort of a fact of society. When you look at
why is he doing our job?
Mississippi River Civilization.
Because all that this
Right.
means is like, hey, yeah, the Israelites were another group of people who were in this cultural milieu and who were doing mostly the same thing. I mean, granted, there were differences, but like, it's very hard to say that they were doing it better than anyone else. I mean, look, go buy Dr. Josh's book, which is titled Dr. Josh. Can I start the title?
Did the Old Testament endorse slavery?
There you go. And one of the things you'll see is that it goes through and makes very direct comparisons between all of these different law codes. There you go. And yeah, in some ways, the Hebrew Bible was better than some of the other ones. In some ways, it was worse. Like, what is it, the Code of Hammurabi said that slaves would go free after the 3rd year for debt slaves? Whereas in the Hebrew Bible, it's like, 7 years?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you. If I had to be a debt slave, I'd prefer 3 over 7 years,
Yeah, no kidding.
So, yeah, it's...
I've been told that some debt slaves would actually have preferred 7 years.
You know what? Maybe
You have
some...
to when that's pushed on you, kind of out of nowhere. You got to say something like that.
Maybe some would, but here's the thing. I'll bet most wouldn't. Because if debt slavery were so great, then why wasn't everyone doing it?
Yeah, why is it that in 1 Kings 4:1, the widow woman doesn't say, Elisha, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Oh, thank goodness.
Look, man,
Ooh.
don't go trying to get me some oil or something to pay off this debt, man. This guy's coming to take care of my 2 kids. Like, don't you even worry about it.
Yeah. I don't want to take care of my own damn kids. Let's sell them off. Yeah, that wasn't the attitude. It was always considered to be a bad thing. That's why it's a penalty for not paying back the money you owe. It's not.
Yeah, Jeremiah 34. Listen, Dapper, Jeremiah 34 is a strong condemnation of the people for releasing those debt slaves. They should have kept them longer because it's good to be a debt slave.
Yeah.
Right?
Look, there's a reason it's not called sunshine and puppy dog slavery. It's called debt slavery for when you default on a debt as a penalty. We got 5 memberships from Arachamian. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Vishanti.
Yeah, I was just going to read from Dr. Josh's fabulous book, because on screen they're citing the Law 282. And did you translate this one yourself, Josh? Because I'm pretty sure
this is Martha Roth. Martha Roth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Laws of Hammurabi 282. If a slave should declare to his master, "You're not my master," he, meaning the master, shall bring charge and proof against him that he is indeed his slave, and his master shall cut off his ear. So, unfortunately, you can't hit him with the Uno reverse card on that one. You kind of.
I didn't even read his analysis of law. I just saw 282 up there and thought, okay, so he's. But if a slave says to his master, "I don't need you,"
yeah, that doesn't seem.
No, it's not. I don't need you. It's you're not my master.
You're not my master.
Like, I don't belong to you.
Yeah. And by the way, cutting off the ear, kind of akin to what happens in Exodus 21, 2-6.
Similar, isn't it?
Oops.
Interesting.
I like this one. I like this one too. There's a myriad of laws on slave auctions, how to auction off slaves, which of course we don't have in the Hebrew Bible. And when I see that says to me, you've got a totally unregulated slave market problem.
Yep.
You know, where
that's worse. Actually, you do see how
that
that's
is worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look,
that's very much worse.
But the thing is, in Leviticus 25, right? That's where you see the restriction on a slave sale, right? Like it's the restriction on the Israelite. So before then, there was not this restriction for the slave sale, right? And ostensibly, foreigners, it's just wide open to doing that, right? So I mean, like this idea that he has any grasp whatsoever on Mesopotamian laws is comical to me.
Yeah, like
I'm speaking about
right
you,
here,
Mr.
it's like
apologist.
If a slave's like, yeah, this guy's not my master. Literally, the dude brings like documents and evidence and like proof, like legally, like, no, I own this guy, and his punishment is his ears cut off. So it's like,
and of course, what people fail to well, I mean, I'd say fail to admit, but they should probably just don't know. Slaves, particularly debt slaves in the ancient Near East, could bring charges against their master, saying, "I've fulfilled my time." Right. So I mean, like this whole idea that they don't have any rights. It's just like go do some reading, right? Crack a book.
Yeah.
The Code of Hammurabi.
What about a 700?
There was a law in there, 282, that if a slave mouths off in a certain way, you could cut his ear off, and that's just one.
That is the most disingenuous way of putting that. It's the most disingenuous way of putting that. Because the thing is, technically, is that true? Yeah, technically, you could say calling someone who is, in fact, legally your owner, no longer your owner, is a certain way of mouthing off. But, like, dude, there's a very specific set of circumstances that triggers this, and you are just ignoring it, and it is really annoying.
Yeah, he wants to make it look like, oh, you can't even say anything against your master. That's how bad and evil it is. When it's like, no, dude, actually, legally, that person would be in the wrong, even though morally, like, we find that odious in this particular case law that the slave would have.
Right, because the idea is supposed to be that this slave is trying to extract himself from his current condition and become a free person. And according to the legal code of the day, that is not what he's supposed to be doing because he is still legally your slave. And so that is how you punish him for basically trying to steal himself from you. That is not just when your slave mounts off in a particular way. This, like, why are we just lying about these laws?
Where did he get
Because it
this
serves
stuff?
Wait, so previously he
like-
cited 2 other apologists who he followed on this, and I think they were specifically chosen because they were both African American apologists. But yeah, I think he's drawing it from one of those 2.
Yeah, this is one of those things that, like, you cannot just repeat claims without verifying them. You have to look it up for yourself. And, like, I mean, go back to the very first primary source that you can reasonably get your hands on. And, like, in this case, just go read the frickin' Law of Hammurabi there. Don't listen to some guy saying, well, this is what it says.
But this guy's
Go back
not
to the
gonna
primary source. We all
this guy's
learned this
not
in
gonna
high
learn
school, like
Akkadian.
primary sources, man. Yeah,
Assuming
like,
it was
I'm not
Akkadian,
going to
right,
say,
Josh?
that's why I
Yeah.
said reasonably, because it's like,
Okay.
oh, I'm going to go learn Akkadian just so I can prove this one line wrong. Like, okay, cool if you want to, but practically find an academic who studies
feel-
this and go, hey, got a good translation?
I feel like it must be easier to learn Akkadian than Sumerian. Am I accurate in that, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, unless you're using, our learn to read Sumerian books,
Oh,
then it's much
obviously,
easier.
yeah. Then it's much easier for Sumerian. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
We've finally, this week, hit the part of your Hebrew class where I know what the heck is going on. I am so relieved.
Nice.
So relieved.
I just feel like Semitic languages are closer in terms of like the way they conceptualize language to like most of the languages that my audience would speak than Sumerian is, right? Like they've got the same basic ideas, you've got aspects and the same kind of basic pronoun distinctions and a very consistent nominative absolutive alignment, unlike Sumerian, which kind of in that case has more in common with Basque than it does with, say, Spanish or English. Yeah.
Freaking fast.
Which, yes, there have also
Scotty
been
for the
suggestions
win.
that maybe Sumerian and Basque are related, and no, they did not hold up to scrutiny. It turns out that more than just the alignment of your arguments needs to have a commonality between languages in order to establish that they're related. Sorry, Basque. Sorry, Sumerian. You don't get to be in a language family together. You get to remain both separate isolates.
One of many. You see that slavery is regulated in these societies. A myriad of laws.
It
on
was
slave
regulated in America too.
And in ancient,
It
like,
is.
the Torah is full of regulations for slavery. What is the distinction that you're trying to draw here, my guy? Do you think it would be better
if
for
he
an
doesn't
unregulated
get to
slavery
the passage,
exist?
doesn't get to the passage where it's like, hey, if you just, pass on, you can like give your slaves as an inheritance to your kids. I wonder
Oh my
if he
God.
would go to that, because that sounds like a regulation to me. I could be wrong.
I found where he got it.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
It's Weebly. Is this a
No.
Oh, Vishanti knows what
No,
that
it's-
is.
What is that? What is this?
Hammurabi code.weebly.com/slave-rights HTML. So here's the line. Let's see. Law 282 states that if a slave were to say to his master, I don't need you, then his ear would be cut off. There is also a ton of laws about slave auctions and how to auction off slaves.
A ton of laws.
So he's a
That's-
plagiarizer too, eh?
Oof.
Oof.
unless that website is run by vocab
Weebly
alone.
is the
it?
GeoCities of like website creation. Okay,
Oh,
so
Let me see.
it's
I mean, I
literally
don't
just
know how
some
to
dude's
tell.
blog.
yeah. So it
just
sounds
some
like
dude's
he's
blog.
being a plagiarist, but it could be his blog. In which case, I would say that it's probably not.
Really?
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a
You
quick
think?
break. I'm going to get myself a fresh can of booze, and then we'll be right back. And in the meantime, I'm hoping that you get to hear the musical stylings of one Beethoven before we come right back. So enjoy that, and yeah, we will see you right on the other side of the break. Okay, we are back, everyone. I want to get right back into this pretty quickly, so I just want to say, hey, thank you so much for all your support. If you are currently not supporting financially, but that's something you're interested in doing, and you can afford it, please don't make this your priority. Make other things like, food, shelter, childcare, that kind of stuff. That's your priority. But if after all your actual priorities are taken care of, you have a bit of extra money that you want to toss my way, there's a Patreon link in the description. There's the channel memberships below this. Either one gets you access to my Discord server. It gets you early access to videos. There are better perks at higher tiers if you want. There's also a merch store. There's something linked right below the video. There's merch there. If you don't like any of that merch, you can click through and find the whole merch store. Also, there's a wish list if you want to get me something from my wish list. It's mostly just random books. And if none of that's something you want to do or can afford, then that's great. Don't do it. I really don't want anyone to give me money they can't afford to. But everyone should like this video, share this video, watch a few of my videos in a row, because it really helps the channel out. And that is something you can do for no more cost than it would normally cost for you to watch a video, which I won't say is free because, electricity and internet aren't free, but it's very, very low cost. And it's probably not more than you already would have been paying for those things anyway. So there you go. With that, though, everyone ready to jump back into the ancient Babylonians and why, for some reason, that makes biblical slavery okay? Or no,
Before
Josh?
maybe we can catch Boat Captain before he goes.
Maybe already rage quit.
Oh, and I got 5 minutes to take from Savage Peanut Petasaurus for gifting membership. So go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, like, this notion that the New Testament condemns slavery based on 1 Timothy 1, 9-10, which is what he's referring to, I suspect, or what they're referring to. It's a statement that lets me know that Boat Captain may need to do some looking into what an anthropotistase is, because like man stealing here in this case is like slave trafficking, right? And this is an act that was condemned not only in the New Testament, right, but in other vice lists.
Yeah, it's also condemned in the laws, in the law codes in the Torah, isn't it?
Yeah, so you're not allowed to steal anybody anywhere, right? Like that's go read the law collections of Hammurabi 14, and you'll see, or the Hittite laws 19 to 21. I mean, you'll see that you're not allowed to steal people, right? This idea that stealing a person is required in order for there to be chattel slavery is just to say you don't understand what chattel slavery is. So
yeah,
hopefully, Boat Captain, you'll hang around and maybe we can get some nuance coming your way.
Because that is a thing, right? Like that has always been condemned in basically every society you can find that has law codes about this. Now you could make the argument that it's one of the things that made, like, say, the Atlantic slave trade particularly onerous, is because in fact it did involve just stealing otherwise free people from various societies and then having them sold to Europeans in order to be transported across the Atlantic. And yeah, if you want to make the argument that's one of the reasons why the Atlantic slave trade is worse than the Babylonian or the Israelite slavery thing, I guess sure. But again, in that case, we're just kind of arguing about which of these horrible things was the worst, when just not doing it has always been an option, and that's what we should do. Supreme scientists. Sorry.
If I could just point out, like, does that mean that following 1807, when the slave trade on the Atlantic was outlawed, completely importing slaves was outlawed, that somehow chattel slavery stopped?
No, it absolutely does not. No. Although, if you want to say that chattel slavery is worsened because of man stealing, and therefore that's the problem with it, then I guess you would have to just accept antebellum slavery after that point, which I don't think most of the people here would do, including Boat Captain. Supreme Scientist for $5 says, is it true that many Bible translation committees use servant to soften the implications of slavery in the Bible, especially with African-American Christians? I don't know if it's true about African-American Christians in particular, but it is certainly the case that many times words that should be translated as slave, like eved in Hebrew or doulos in Greek, are translated as servant in order to soften that implication. Yeah. I don't think it's appropriate. And in fact, I know enough of both of those languages to check every time I see servant as to whether or not the translation there should be slave, and it almost always is. Kitsune for £5 says, evolutionary psychology is a science. I would disagree. Also, Dr. Josh, if you see someone yawning in Hebrew class, it's not because I'm bored. It's just really late here. Okay.
Awesome.
I think here's my thing with the evolutionary psychology. I think it could be a science. I don't think it's there yet. But that was also true of psychology not that long ago. I don't think psychology was a science just 50 years ago. I think it probably could be considered a science now. They have more rigorous techniques. There's actually people looking at reproducibility in studies. There's actual like theories and ideas, and we have some scientific backing for a lot of the stuff in psychology, but that was not the case that long ago. Maybe evolutionary psychology can get there. I just don't think they're there yet.
I don't know if you guys knew this, but theology is the queen of the science.
Yes, I have heard that, yeah.
I think you mean apologetics.
How to auction off slaves. That's because society was in 3 different classes. And again, this is all pretty common stuff. Doesn't make it right, but it's how men and women under sin do things. Ancient Egypt, same thing. Obviously, the big example is Israelites enslaved for 400 years. I get these.
Which isn't a thing that happened. Just want to point that out. That is not a literal historical event. Every bit of archaeology that we have indicates
even put
that
dates on it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Everything we have from
That's
archaeology.
bold.
Hey, what?
Yeah.
But can you? Did he say 1850 to 1450?
Come on, Kip.
Like, is that even a?
That's precise.
Yeah, he
I mean,
knows.
he could have said 1446, right? But
Okay.
But yeah, everything about from archaeology we have indicates that the Israelites were a group of Canaanites that became more and more distinct as time went on, and they did not originate anywhere else.
how dare you?
Something tells me.
The closest you're going to get is that Egyptian hegemony did frequently extend up like that Levantine coast, and pockets of them probably were liberated from the hegemony of Egypt, but like in terms of being on the other side of the Nile River, like
yeah, the Exodus as it's portrayed in Genesis just isn't a thing that historically happened.
Something tells me that vocab Malone just found himself removed from Inspiring Philosophy's Christmas card list.
Oh no. Poor vocab Malone.
Oh no, what's he gonna do?
One thing that really bugs me about Inspiring Philosophy is that when he actually has like a topic that he's not just like dogmatically required to get wrong, he can actually do good research. Like if you've seen his video on the history of young Earth creationism, it's actually excellent.
Yes,
he could be doing great stuff.
But
I'm gonna actually give him props. Like I don't just shit all over his theology, but like literally his video on younger creationism started like that ball rolling.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, there's a person who's, considers themselves within whatever stream that goes, hey, I'm still a part of this club and I don't take it literally in this thing and here's why. And I was like, wow, he made a really good case. And that like helped me along my journey to coming out of younger. So like freaking credit where it's due, man.
He can do really good research when he wants to and allows himself to. It's just that he almost never does. We got a few things. Roshina out of all over color for 199 says, you mean anal fascinations weren't science? Yeah, by and large, that they weren't. DM Google the Bunker Wing also gifted a membership, so we will take a drink for that. Thank you very much. All right, here we go.
These pro-Kemetic guys, sometimes I got to deal with, Eric. They're like members of the conscious community who view Egypt as the fountainhead of all good ideas. And
okay, those people are also annoying, so I get it.
Yeah,
that these things have been ripped off or something like that, and they're like, "What?"
It's this group that like to call themselves Kemeticists, and basically it's taken from the the Egyptological pronunciation for the Egyptian name for Egypt, and basically they're just trying to pretend that every bit of learning that has ever been known was actually known to the ancient Egyptians, and they're the ones who spread every good thing around the world. Often they're Afrocentric.
About that tricontinental root,
similar.
The KMT, the
They sound kind of similar to a certain classicist that I know.
Yeah, well, for whom it's the Greeks. I've actually heard a Kemeticist say that Plato studied at the Library of Alexandria, and that's where he got all of his ideas. Just don't worry about the fact that the conquest of Alexander post-dates the life of Plato entirely. Don't worry about that.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Just, it's basically it's a flavor of Afrocentrism, which is basically just the idea that rather than some other place being the source of civilization, which by the way isn't a thing, there's no one source of civilization anywhere, that actually it's Africa. Which is just the other side of the
Yeah,
coin of
it's like-
Eurocentrism, right?
It's essentially a direct response to like
Yes.
the Aryan like supremacy
Right.
crap.
Hey, guys, it turns
So-
out that hyperdiffusionism is wrong no matter where you put the center of the hyperdiffusion. It doesn't make it right if you make it Africa. It doesn't make it right if you make it Atlantis. It doesn't make it right if you make it like the Aryans in India or something. It's just always wrong. Also, Naranda puts us gifted membership. Thank you very much. We will take a drink there. And here we go.
Well, they didn't really have slaves in ancient Egypt in that way. But then you actually look, and they certainly did have slaves in ancient Egypt in that way. Let me just show you some.
Egypt does seem to have had fewer slaves, and slavery was a less important part of their society than it was in many other places at the time. But they absolutely had slaves.
Mhm.
Proof real quick here. Here we got some reliefs around the Ramses II temple around the entrance. Let me show you these reliefs here. These are actually Nubian slaves.
Well, they're war captives specifically, but yeah, they were probably
Yeah,
then
that's going
turned
to say
into
the war
slaves.
captives. That's a
So one of the things that's stereotypical in Egyptian art is that you see the groups of conquered places near the name of the conquered location, which actually might be, if you look at the left, there's that circular glyph that's like in the third row of, like third column of glyphs to the right. That's the ideogram for city, so that's probably part of the name for the whatever city this was conquest of. And these are captives that are being taken from that city to Egypt. And yeah, they're probably becoming slaves, but in this point, they're being portrayed as war captives, which could have been ransomed, at least hypothetically. I doubt they were, but yeah, so it's a little bit more complex than just these are Nubian slaves. They are, in fact, Nubians who are being taken as war prisoners. This is a stereotypical pose, as well as the binding at the elbow. You see that all the way back in the Narmer tablet, which is one of our earliest hieroglyphic texts of any kind. So, hey, we're stepping into the area where I have a little bit of knowledge of the languages.
If people are interested, there's a brand new publication that's sitting down on my shelf. I always forget names of books, so I looked it up. But it like just came maybe maybe a month ago. But it's Slavery and Dependence in Ancient Egypt, Sources and Translation. So if people are interested in this topic, there's a brand new source on it. Also,
Who's published it? Who published it?
And
Well, Josh, I
It
want
is.
to say Dr. Tapioca Weasel has gifted membership. Thank you very much.
Cambridge University Press.
Damn. Okay. Well, I'm
And
going
I
to
just-
also put something in the chat because Brill's having a 50% off deal.
I just want to make sure that everybody knows that if it's in iconography, it can't be propagandistic.
Yeah, that's
Just
impossible.
remember
Oh,
that.
no, of course not.
Right.
Although we do have good
No.
reason to think that
Definitely
there
very
were
real literal history.
actual wars between Egyptians and surrounding kingdoms in which either side took slaves. I mean, that is very likely to have happened.
Don't tell me those don't look like enslaved persons. They certainly
They don't. They look like war captives, which is not the same
They
thing.
look like war captives.
Yeah.
Good job giving yourself away there, guy.
are. And there you have the Egyptians enslaving fellow Africans. The Egyptians are Africans by
Okay, look, this is not terribly
Oh my
related,
God.
but there was
Okay.
no idea of an African identity until, like, very recently.
Pan-Africanism is extremely modern.
Right. You would never hear someone in ancient Egypt call themselves African, because for one thing, they didn't conceptualize the world in the same way that we do. They didn't think of themselves as being part of a continent of Africa. They were Egyptians, and there were other surrounding kingdoms that they would identify by their name for that kingdom. Now, the idea of Pan-Africanism is itself a response to European colonialism in the continent of Africa, which created the very concept in Africa of an Pan-African identity. Until you get to European colonialism in Africa, the idea of calling yourselves Africans and thinking of other people on that continent as fellow Africans is completely foreign, not just to the Egyptians, but to everyone else there too. Pan-Africanism is very, very recent. If you imported anything before like the 18th or 19th century, it doesn't make any sense.
definition. And then they're enslaving Nubians. This is what was going on.
The war captives.
The Bible
I mean, they were also enslaving them later, but yeah, these are not directly slaves. These are war captives.
changed all this when rightly
I'm sorry.
Is he?
Hey,
and he's not going to show
there-
like the Sea People's battle where like dudes got him by the. Like, come
Well,
on.
here's my question. All right. We've got two scholars of this topic here with us. So, Kit, Josh, are there instances in the narrative of the Hebrew scriptures in which the Israelites or Hebrews or whatever we want to call the people who are the subject of these books go and make war on another country or city or nation, win, and then take some of that population as slaves for themselves. Is that a thing that occurs anywhere in the Hebrew scriptures?
Man, let me think.
Numbers 31.
It's tough.
1 Samuel 15.
I mean, it's all operating based on the principle from Deuteronomy 20:10-14. So
Yeah.
Right.
So it's everywhere
Exactly.
throughout the historical narrative of the Hebrew scriptures. It's just there. Okay.
Can I just make the point here? Before he moves on, because I'm sure he's done with the whole Egypt enslaving people bad thing. So the whole thrust of the narrative in the Hebrew Bible is not that enslavement was bad and that's why Israel was rescued. The thrust of the narrative is that the sons of Israel were inappropriately enslaved, like they were stolen, right?
Right.
Because the sons of Israel, we are told explicitly within the texts, are the slaves and the property of Yahweh. So he went in there to get them back.
Right.
Because
They're his
they
slaves,
did not
Pharaoh's.
belong
Yeah.
to Egypt. Yeah, never mind all those other slaves, in Egypt or in any other part of the world. No, it's these people belong to me. So I'm taking them back.
Yeah, it's interesting
it.
how there's no story about how God leaves all the numerous slaves in Mesopotamia out of their captivity and delivers them to a promised land.
Yeah.
They weren't apparently God's concern in the same way.
We compare even Old Testament slavery, meaning the slavery that was regulated with certain conditions. We compare it, we see that we have the teaching that man's made it.
But you've compared it explicitly to other kinds of slavery that had many of the same regulations, and in some case had regulations that were even more favorable to the slaves than the ones that you're touting. What are you doing, my guy? This is... Josh, I gotta say, it is baffling to me that this man is basically trying to make a condensed version of the same argument that you made with the exact same points of evidence, but he's coming to the opposite conclusion. And I'm just like, what is happening right now?
it's almost as if he doesn't understand the data.
Oh, man. Yeah. Huh.
But what the hell is with this list? Point 2 says voluntary servitude, and point 6 says servanthood was often voluntary.
Good God. This is really padding out the word count to meet the assignment, isn't it?
So here, well, let's go through this before he does, because I think it'll be valuable, just like last time. Okay,
Woo!
man made in the image of God is not something that occurs in any of the slave regulations in the Bible, right? It just doesn't come up. It's not.
No, but Dapper, you don't understand.
Okay.
Right? Matthew 19 takes us back to Genesis.
Right.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And this was in the mind of every writer in the Hebrew Bible. Come on, somebody.
That's why they didn't write it.
Preach up in here.
I feel like we don't have evidence of that, but okay. We had a couple super chats before we keep going.
Yeah, it's lovely how, a text that wasn't written until centuries after most of those texts were redacted, it just gets to retcon that whole system. That's really cool.
I mean, that's pretty common in religious texts,
cool.
if I'm being honest. In fact, actually, if you look at the Quran, various parts of the Quran abrogate earlier parts of the Quran, and all of it was written in the lifetime of one guy. So, that happens all the time. All right, Domingo Aviles for 5 beaver bucks says, are the persons mentioned in Leviticus 27 slaves or just dependents dedicated to their paterfamilias? Also, what are they being redeemed from exactly? I would have to double check with Leviticus 27 in order to answer that. But I'm going to read another super chat. If anyone wants to double check that, and then we can maybe get an answer to that.
Is he talking about Leviticus 25?
It says 27, but it could have been.
I know, but
Yeah, probably talking about Leviticus. Right?
I'm not sure. Domingo, if you actually meant Leviticus 25, please let us know. Tag me or Vishanti in the chat. I think those will probably be the easiest to do that. Okay, we have we were just gifted 10 memberships by Savage Pinnipitasaurus Cobra. Thank you very much. We also have Roshina out of all over Keller for $1.99 says regulated is their way out. What? It is interesting. These guys do seem like they're usually anti-regulation, but then suddenly, I guess when it's slavery, no. It's very important. We can't let the hand of the market take care of that. Supreme Scientist, Afrocentrism is not merely a reaction to Eurocentrism. It's a legit effort to promote a balanced and inclusive understanding of history and culture. Yeah, the thing is that when I actually look at Afrocentrist works, it never actually is that.
Thing is, I can't speak for the rest of the panel. I was talking about Pan-Africanism, not Afrocentrism, and largely, like, the unfortunate reality is that what may have been intended doesn't seem to be playing out, because what we see is just hyper prioritization. There is literally an entire other continent with hundreds of other cultures that almost never get mentioned.
Yeah, look,
so
there is a good reason.
Hey, look, if they can get the Hoteps under control, I'm sure it will like play out a lot better. But right now, it's.
There was a Dapper's a professional right there, so we'll take a drink for that. And then Savage Pinnipitasaurus gave 10 memberships. We'll be drinking that in a second. And look, here's the thing. I'm sure that you can come up with a version of Afrocentrism that is not what I've actually been seeing from Afrocentrists. That is, in fact, just an effort to push back on Eurocentrism and point out that hyperdiffusionism isn't okay. I don't know why you would then call it Afrocentrism, since I would just call that, history. But it's not what I generally see when I see people who self-identify as Afrocentrists writing books, giving lectures, or talking in churches, which is another thing they sometimes do. So, Savage Pinnipitasaurus gave 10 memberships, and I'll be taking that drink while we hit play on this.
In the image of God, we have a situation that's often voluntary, not always. We're gonna get into that. We have the servitude's typically not permanent, but of course servants could request otherwise. There we see that.
What about the foreign slaves? Were they temporary?
Well, Kip, I haven't watched this video. I think you were there when it aired. Like they don't even come up on Leviticus 25, do they?
No, they just ignore it completely.
Now, I mean, it's possible that it's in the hidden part of the video, right? Maybe that's really where they go into depth on the most critical passage about slavery and Hebrew Bible in this context. Maybe they were just saving it all up. That must be it. That must be it. But yes,
it's all encapsulated in that last point there. Servanthood often was often voluntary.
Yeah.
Often.
Yeah. Yeah, we've already talked about that a bit. I've already said my piece on that. Also, I love that means to help the poor, as if the only option is just to enslave people. And here's the thing, even if that's your goal, you're going about it in a very, very silly way. Remember, again, we have a story in the Bible in which a poor woman is crying out for help lest her kids who are poor be forced to be sold into slavery, because she didn't want that. She did not think that was a good way for her or her children to be helped. It's almost like, whether or not that was the intention, the actual people who had to suffer under the system did not feel like that was a good way to help them. They would have preferred another option, like maybe just being given a little bit of help, a little bit of money, maybe some oil.
Yeah, this is the whole point, right, of Leviticus 25, and then I'm probably going to have to drop off, guys. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
But like Leviticus 25, this is sort of the turning point, right? At least the writers wanted to seem at least this way. Bruce Wells has a really great article on the quasi-alien in Leviticus 25 that puts it in a different perspective. But yeah, I mean, as far as the text is concerned, like the point is that if a fellow Israelite goes through like stages of falling into poverty, their Israelite brothers are supposed to help them along and not take advantage of them, right? And to the point that, and this is sort of where it becomes germane here, if an Israelite sells off all their land, doesn't have anything else to give, and they end up having to sell themselves. All the that they have left is themselves. That they're not allowed to treat them as a slave, right? They have to treat them as a hired worker. And so, like, the fact that the text is going out of its way to say, not like a slave, it's clear that the writers of Leviticus 25 think that the status of Eved is not a good thing, right? I don't think that they think it's a moral issue. Mm-hmm. I just think they think it's the same as taking a loan at interest. Not good, right? Not beneficial. So this idea that we've got to make this great list, to say, oh, but they liked it, right? They want to sign up forever, right? This is to fundamentally misunderstand, I think. At least major sections of these law collections. But guys, thank you for letting me pop in here and then just drop out suddenly.
Josh, you are. Look, if I'm streaming about slavery, you are obviously welcome here. So
I appreciate it. All right.
But guys, although I also understand why you might not want to always stick around, because my goodness, everyone wants you to talk about slavery.
Oh my god! No, I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, enjoy the rest.
All right, later, man.
Bye. By the way, we did get an update from who was it?
Domingo Aviles.
Yes,
Domingo. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was Leviticus 27:3. I'm going to read a little bit before that. We'll start in 2b. If anyone makes a special vow to dedicate a person to the Lord by giving the equivalent value, set the value of a male between the ages of 20 and 50. 20 and 60 at 50 shekels, or silver according to the sanctuary shekel. For a female, set her value at 30 shekels. For a person between the ages of 5 and 20, set the value of a male at 20 shekels, and of a female at 10 shekels. For a person between one, it keeps going like that. So, and I'll double check their super chat so that I know the exact question that they were having, so I don't get it wrong. Are the persons mentioned in this verse slaves or just dependents dedicated by the paterfamilias? I believe they are dependents of the paterfamilias in this case.
Yeah, the way it's structured, and it seems that this seems to be just dedicated family members to the sanctuary. It's not specified, but we have similar sort of rules to this in other Canaanite and ancient Near Eastern texts. So usually the best way to read these things is if there's something that looks quite similar.
We got a
comparative literature.
Got a few things to read here. Mark Akaboto 1313 Smith, who's been a member for 18 months, is at the Tetrapod level. Says greetings and salutations. Well, greetings and salutations to you too. Rochina out of all over Keller gifted 5 memberships. I did take drinks for those. That is why the count went up. Myral Randar, who's been a member for 13 months, is at the Tetrapod level, says this entire panel rocks. Thank you all. Well, thank you for watching. Because quite frankly, if you weren't watching, I wouldn't have gathered a panel. And sends facehugs to brighten your day Gladstone for $5, says, late to the party, just wanted to say slavery apologists are a bag of AIGs, which I agree with, and we will take a drink for that.
Yes. With Leviticus 27, I would need some clarification on, what are the boundaries around the phrase there? Does ish ki yafli neder? If a man consecrates, or that root is usually used for wonders or miracles, something super
in the
impressive.
Hifil,
so I'm what's going on here?
In the Hifil, and it's obviously it's something that that the lexicographers have struggled with, because they give a couple of different thoughts about this. On the one hand, it looks like some have suggested that it might actually be a mispointed PL. In which case they take it to mean making us or fulfilling a special vow. So but the language is not altogether clear.
Because I, just looking at it without having really investigated or dug into what some of the sages are analyzing out of that, I would say that the vow itself is a miraculous, wondrous, like, big freaking deal. It's not just like, oh, I think I'm going to dedicate someone today. It's like, this is a very unique, special circumstance, but that's only being framed by my understanding of what fele is as like a root. So, yeah, I would need to dig deeper on that before I can say, like, oh, this is something that goes along with slavery, or for this is something like in a completely different circumstance.
All right, I'm gonna. My unfinished journey for $6.66 says, "Hail Nero, hail Dapper and guests, and hail ancient studies." Thank you very much. Also, Mayral Randar has given me that as what I think the pronunciation is supposed to be. If I'm still getting it wrong, please let me know. I'm reading that as Mayral Randar. But again, this is the problem of not knowing the International Phonetic Alphabet. You can try to write things out phonetically, but I might interpret the phonetic meaning of those letters differently than you do, because English is stupid.
Servant masters had restrictions, and a lot of this was done essentially as a means to help the poor. That's what I want to try to show by some verses here.
Here's the thing, though. It's really not a means to help the poor. It's a means to help the rich by exploiting the poor.
Yeah, this is people recovering their money. This is not helping the poor. This is actually harming them.
Yeah.
This is like
it's
this
like
is the labor equivalent to debtor's prison. So how is this helping
it's
the
helping
poor?
you the same way that the bank giving you an overdraft fee is helping you, because they could have just refused to let you buy that thing. Like, I don't think that's helping in the way you think it is. Ben Predictable Mutation Thick Tunicate B2022, who's been a member for 15 months and is at the amnio level, is on a scale of 1 to AIG/Elon Musk. How big of a dick are these apologists? I mean, they're certainly not as big as Elon Musk, because they're certainly not causing as much damage to just the world as Elon Musk is.
Yeah.
They're also much smaller time than AIG.
It's like a 7.
Yeah. Seems reasonable. Which also, hey, we're like 10% of the left to get to a fancy new avatar for the next video I make.
Oh, hey,
So,
nice.
Yeah, we're really close.
Because everyone's trying to get Jillian a membership, so they're being extra generous today.
Rochina out of all over Keller for $1.99 says, the linguist says English is stupid. Not a linguist, but yes it is.
You're not beating the charges.
Hey, listen. At least English has a neuter gender.
True.
Which I've learned from some Greek aficionados that I've encountered online. Is just a really, really, really remarkable thing.
It's
is it also like super remarkable that English no longer uses gendered nouns?
Indo-European languages typically have a neuter gender. The ones that don't, that's a late development where they dropped neuter.
It's special. It's special.
Oh,
Dapper.
right. I know.
The world would be a different place if
yes, of course. And also, Quinn, I will say English does have a second person plural. It's just that people refuse to start using it. It's y'all. Y'all is the second person plural.
Well, it's a second person plural. But also, Ben Predictable Mutations B2022 gifted 5 memberships. Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't know why it is that Jillian is being excluded. We do have to get her membership back because she is the Dapper Dinosaur server mom. So
here,
at this rate, we're going to get GTA.
Any questions on that so far? Is that somewhat helping lay the foundation before we get into some of these versions?
Oh, that really helps show us there's a difference between what we experienced as slavery here in America, and which, by the way, was America was
hold on, stop it for a second. Listen, stop it. Did you guys catch that? Did you guys catch blue-eyed, blonde hair, white Eric Hovind talking about the slavery that we experienced in America?
Look, come on. He just experienced it on the more preferable side.
Yeah, really. Jeez.
Look, it's not like the slave owners didn't experience the institution of slavery. They were just the ones getting the advantage out
They
of it.
just experienced it from the not slave
Right,
side.
exactly. There's two sides.
Oh, things
God. We.
things that you will
Talk
never
about we.
hear coming out of my mouth for $100,
Nope,
please.
nope, nope.
Oh,
Okay, everyone needs to super chat next time Kip is live. Pay him $100 to say we experienced slavery. see if he actually makes good on his promise not to do it.
I should have said 1,000.
Yup.
And Mayoral Randar, whatever. I'm sorry. Was told that y'all was for a large group. No, y'all can be for just two. It could be for two people.
Yeah, so look, the usage varies.
All y'all is for a large group.
All y'all
inclusive.
tends to be a very large group.
Yeah.
Ben Predictable Thick
Y'all can just
Tunicate B2022 for £5 says, for the avatar, quote, dropped neuter sounds like AIG. Oh, take a drink. Also, hey, what is it? Is it Swedish that has common and neuter as the two genders? I know it's one of the Scandinavian languages. They historically combined masculine and feminine into common, and then that left two genders, one of which was descended from the Germanic neuter gender, and the other one was descended from both masculine and feminine.
Percentage of the world population when it came to slavery. Now, not questioning is slavery barbaric.
Okay, here's the thing. You were consistently using debt slavery as your comparison for American slavery, but that's inappropriate.
And now he switched it.
Right. And it's like, dude, America does not actually have a long history with debt slavery. It really doesn't. I mean, you can make the argument that some of the indentured servants that were sent over were debt slaves, and I can entertain that. But that was by far the minority of slavery in the United States, right? And we have a direct parallel in the Hebrew Bible in slaves from other nations who were not going to be set free, who did not have rights as Israelites, who were not there because they were poor and couldn't pay back their debts. Erachamian has just gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. Thank you very much. And let's see. Savage Pinnipedisaurus Cobra.
Ian Houston clarified, yes, it is.
Okay, good. I thought it was Swedish, but I don't know Swedish, so what do I know? And then Savage Pinnipedisaurus Cobra for $5 says, he wouldn't happen to be related to someone with expertise and experience in exploiting vulnerable people for their labor, would he? Yeah. So, in case you guys don't know, Kent Hovind likes to take advantage of people who are fresh out of prison and who, for that reason, are having a really hard time getting back on their feet. You know, because ex-cons don't tend to do
because they're
well.
marks.
Yeah, well, ex-cons in the United States
just
have an extremely hard time
predatory in
finding
his labor practices.
Right. They have an extremely hard time finding employment of any kind or stable living conditions or anything. And so he will drive around looking for ex-cons to invite them to come and work for room and board at his company. Yeah. Savage Pinnipedisaurus. Oh, no, we already read that. All right, so I'm going to hit play, and I'm going to take those 5 drinks from Erchamian.
It is barbaric and humane, especially the way we practiced it. But America was actually not a world leader in the slave trade. And I want Americans to understand this.
Who cares?
Okay, and
What?
doesn't
Where is
matter.
he going with this?
Look, historical fact,
gladly-
more slaves
Man,
went to
hang
Brazil.
on,
Who
I'm sorry.
cares? Who
freaking cares? America was so into slavery, we thought ourselves over it.
Look, if the total number of slaves who had ever been held or imported into the United States was literally 1, that would be unacceptable.
Yes.
I think
yes.
I think maybe this is it's just dawned on me now. I think this is how the argument works for Eric. Biblical slavery, good kind of slavery.
Bingo.
American slavery, bad, but still not as bad as the Brazilians. That's it, right? It's on a scale.
I will say,
right?
it probably was less horrible to be a slave in the United States than in Brazil, but that doesn't make it okay. The fact that the United States slavery could have been worse is not an argument that it was okay. That is not how this works, right? It's like we were talking about earlier with the kidnapping. The fact that you could be a nicer kidnapper doesn't make kidnapping okay. Right? Like, it doesn't, that's not how this works. We got a few things. Milwaukee Atheist for $2 says, why is Kip avoiding the originality of the Septuagint with a smiley face? Yeah, Kip. Why can't you just acknowledge that?
I can't handle it, Lawrence. I just can't.
I'll be honest. As my brother actually sent me that Ammon Hillman podcast, and I was like, "This is
and you were like, you love him even more for it, right?"
Okay, so I want to be fair. My brother sent this to me not as a, hey, look at this. This is great. I didn't know this. He was like, hey, what is up with this? Is there any validity to this at all? Because my brother knows that I know more about him than this. And this is the brother who was on the channel, by the way, way back. So I do want to be fair. He did not send this to me as like, oh my God, I didn't know about this. This is great. Do you know about, like, he was like, hey, this seems interesting, but I don't know how to assess it. And so we had a big, long conversation about it. But when I was looking at it, because that was the first time I was looking at it, I was like, this is bonkers. How does anyone take this man seriously?
Google bonkers.
Yeah, well, Roshina Audubon over Keller for $4.99. Oh no, sorry, I skipped one. Savage Pinnipetasaurus Cobra for $2 says, also a world laggard in abolition. World laggard in abolition. There we go. That was hard for me to read for some reason. I don't know why. Roshina Audubon over Keller for $4.99 says, wouldn't Kent's workers be indentured slaves, or what would you call people forced to do labor to have a place to live? I mean, ultimately, that's basically everyone. Because, I mean, if I don't do my job, I don't get to keep living in a place. But it is especially onerous when you do not otherwise pay people, and instead they are paid room and board such that if they can't save up to extricate themselves from your control, right?
This is why company towns are bad, people.
Right. Especially when it's like, oh, we're going to pay you in company script, which is only usable at the company store in the company town. Yeah, right. Which means that once you're there, you're stuck. And that is a different thing than just being paid a wage for your labor and then using it on housing and food and whatever else. Vandalia 1998 for $1.99 says, ex-cons are Kent's former roommates after all. I mean, there is that. He does have that connection to the ex-con community in that he is one of them. But he's one of them who can then immediately turn around after getting out of prison and start re-conning all of his old barks, because remember, they thought he shouldn't have been in prison in the first place. And look, if you want to go into like discussions about like the morality of what the United States does with their tax money, or the fact that the IRS is basically playing a you go to jail maybe game where they already know how much you owe and they won't tell you, but if you get it wrong, then in fact you might go to jail. Yeah, look, there's all those good reasons to be very much against the way the United States government runs their taxes. I get it. But fundamentally, Kent knew how to do his taxes. He just opted not to. Right? This is not one of those things where, like, it was an honest mistake, and oh no, I just accidentally structured payments dozens of times.
Honestly and intentionally did it.
Right. Yeah.
Honestly meant to.
Yeah, there's a big difference between, like actually, this past year, technically I overpaid, right? I overpaid by $6. And the IRS was like, oh, hey, you didn't pay us right. Here's a check for $6. That's a mistake,
wow, don't
right?
Spend it all in one place.
Right. I wasn't going around trying to, like, misdo my taxes. I was honestly trying to account for all the money I came in, various deductions, and send that off to them. Turns out I was wrong by $6. That's a different kind of thing. Even if I had underpaid by $6, that's not the same thing, right? There's no, like, intentionality. They probably couldn't convict because of a lack of mens rea, unless they sent me the bill and then I continued to not pay that. Anyway, I don't want to keep talking about the United States government. Instead, we'll talk about slavery, because somehow that seems like the more preferable thing to talk about right now.
Because it seems like we're trying to make this an American thing, and America did this to the world, and it was so bad.
They keep trying to make it an American thing. Eric, your friends and your buddies keep trying to make it an American thing. You refuse to analyze it in context.
Yeah, I want to make this about a thing about the ancient Near East and slavery as an institution there and how that reflects in the text of the Bible. I do not care in the context of biblical endorsement of slavery what the American slave owners did. It doesn't matter. I do care about it.
It's not
in terms
relevant.
Of its. Yeah, it's not relevant. I do care about it in terms of history, in terms of its legacy today. I care about those things. But if you want to have a conversation about what does the Bible say about slavery, here's the thing. I don't give an entire fuck about what the United States slave system was like at all in that context. It doesn't matter. You might as well tell me what the slave context was like in Mordor. I just don't care.
Real quick before you go to those other verses, 12.7 million Africans were taken out of Africa and sold into slavery by other Africans.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I hate him.
I mean, look,
I hate him.
It's one of those things where it's like
Eric Hovind.
it's
Eric, I used to give you credit for stuff. I hate you.
this is one of those talking points where, like, yeah, it is true that by and large there weren't slave raids from Europeans in Africa, and they were mostly taken by other Africans. But then, what do you do with that fact now? What does that do? Does that exonerate any of the Europeans who are participating? Obviously not. It just implicates another group of people, and it's still irrelevant to this topic.
Look, if I had $1 for every person in my life when I lived in Alabama that said that slavery, well, I mean, Africans are doing it to each other, as if that, one, mattered, two, justified it, I would literally be wealthy. I would be independently wealthy.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous.
It's one of those
and I
things
think the look on his face is very telling, because he's like,
smug.
They were doing it to each other.
Look,
Get out of here.
If you want to have a discussion about the portrayal of the slave trade in Africa and the fact that that is occasionally whitewashed over, like, I'm not a big fan of The Woman King for the very specific reason that the protagonists in that story historically were actually extremely pro-slavery and wrote repeated letters to, like, European monarchs to try to keep them buying slaves. Great, if you want to have that discussion, but that's a separate discussion. That's not a discussion about the conditions in North America in terms of slavery. It's not a discussion about biblical slavery in the ancient Near East. It's not a discussion about the morality of slavery and anything like that. It is a different historical question, right? And yeah, I do think it would be nice if, people had a better understanding of the history of slavery in Africa as well as other places. But it's not the question that we're here. And also, it is like Vishanti said, virtually every time I hear an American bring up the slave trade in Africa, it's as a way to downplay slavery in North America, which is not an appropriate thing to do. You can bring that up without making excuses for American slavery, because there is no excuse for American slavery. There just isn't. If you're trying to make one up, you're already wrong. We got, let's see, Roshana Out of All Over Killer for $1.99 says, Eric, stop trying to excuse slavery. I mean, he can't, though, because the Bible endorses it, so he has to come up with excuses.
So black people sold black people into slavery. 43% of those slaves went to Portugal and Brazil. 24% of them went to Great Britain. 15% of them went to Spain.
By the way, those numbers changed over time as various places illegalized the importation of slaves. But okay, or I guess maybe he's trying to do like a total sum over the entire Atlantic slave trade. Maybe then.
Yeah, and how much of this, the time frame is important.
Yeah.
Right? Because how much of this happened before the United States was a thing?
Most of it.
Most of it, actually.
Yeah. The United States banned the importation of slaves very early on after it formed. And then not long after, the British Empire basically made it like an international effort to just end slave trading overall. And they were mostly successful. They weren't entirely successful, but they were mostly successful. They also actually tried to stop Arab slave raids in Africa during the time that they had control over various African territories, which by and large were the parts that were neighboring Arab areas. So they not only ended the European slave trade, they greatly diminished the Arab slave trade. They didn't get rid of it. In fact, the Arab slave trade is still going right now. Which is why I'm
Quinn's he's weirdly informed about those numbers. I know why.
Yeah.
I know why.
Stephen G. Quinner for $5 says, when did slavery's bad period get so hard? It's always been hard.
Yes.
That's the thing it's because many people either have ancestors who've done it or who have religious texts that, according to their interpretation, cannot be interpreted as being themselves immoral in their proclamations. It has always been hard for some people to just say slavery is bad. And it's always going to be hard as long as people like Eric feel like they have to defend every single word of the Bible as being morally just. As long as that remains
a theological choice. He can make a different one. I've seen Christians do it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've seen many Christians do it. You don't have to defend every single part of the Bible as morally just. You just don't.
11% went to France, 5% to the Dutch, 2.5% came to the United States of America, 1%
that
went
makes
to
it
Denmark.
okay then, Eric.
Yeah, what number?
Chode?
What number wouldn't be okay or would be okay? Where's the number that makes this better or worse?
Is the number bigger than 0?
Yeah. Rochina out of all over color for $4.99 says, I don't know what the true numbers are, but I'd question any number out of Eric's purdy mouth. So here's the thing. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but he is right that the United States received a relatively small portion of slaves in the transatlantic slave trade. That is a historical fact. It's just, I don't see what the relevance of it is to the question of whether or not the Bible endorses slavery, right? It's kind of like, if you want to make an argument, like, does the Bible endorse alcohol? Which it very obviously does. But then you're like, yeah.
And it lets you trade in your sacrifices for hard liquor.
Right. But
that's also cool.
But then if you wanted to go into like statistical analysis about fetal alcohol syndrome or something, like, it's irrelevant to the question. Is it an important thing to talk about? Is it an important thing to know about fetal alcohol syndrome? Yeah, sure it is. But it's a different part of the whole idea of alcohol than does the Bible endorse people drinking alcohol? Which, yes, it does. It also condemns doing it to excess. Just like it also condemns extremely poor treatment of slaves, but it endorses slavery overall. And by the way, if you're someone who thinks that the Bible doesn't endorse people drinking alcohol, I'm sorry, but you're just flatly wrong.
Checkmate, Baptist.
So we got 2.5% of the slave trade here in America, about 300,000 slaves. And America originally had laws against...
Hey, Dapper. When did the first, European settlers arrive on what we now call American coast?
I mean, I guess it depends on
exactly... just a vague time.
I mean, like the 1600s, 17th century in North American.
Oh, so that's at least 150 years. Like 150 years after, the discovery of the New World, and Portugal and Spain were fighting over who was going to control it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that has something to do with the disparity in numbers, Eric.
Yeah, it certainly does.
The fact that America didn't have the level of governance that these other nations did for another 200 years, at least. Maybe that has something to do with it, Eric.
When the Atlantic slave trade started up, what's now the United States largely just wasn't a market yet, because there weren't people living there who could buy the slaves. That is a big part of it. If what's now the United States had been settled earlier, then they would have received a much higher portion of those slaves.
Yep.
So I don't want to get into all that right now, but
then why did you bring it up?
You brought it up, you dickweed.
Literally, no one made you do this, Eric. I didn't do it. Nope. Roshina out of all over color for $4.99 says the wine was non-alcoholic grape juice. Kent Hovind. Yeah, here's the thing. The idea of non-alcoholic grape juice is an invention of the 19th century. Sure, everyone knew that you could take a grape and crush it up and drink that juice directly, but no one did. Right?
Is that a thing that he says?
Yeah. He thinks that the word...
I figured that from Southern Baptist a lot. They were like, oh yeah, Jesus turned water into non-alcoholic grape juice. I'm like, great, so that would be a party,
Kent Hovind, in all of his Greek knowledge, has decided that the word oinos can just as easily be translated as non-alcoholic grape juice, which it absolutely cannot be translated that way. There is literally no textual or archaeological evidence that the word oinos could possibly ever mean non-alcoholic grape juice. It's not a thing.
But I was about to say let's be fair. I don't think I should say that. But let's also note that people have gotten a lot better at fermenting and distilling alcohol.
True.
Now than they were in
look, having
the first century.
Having a cup of wine now is not the same thing as having a cup of oinos in ancient Greece or something.
No.
It's not the same.
I mean, we don't water it down. That's part of it.
Well, yeah, but also look, people could get drunk off of the wine. In fact, Kent says that specifically about the wedding at Cana story, because that's the most obvious place where it seems like Jesus himself is endorsing drinking wine. And the thing is that the idea that it's non-alcoholic grape juice doesn't make sense in the context of the story, because one of the wedding goers points out that usually people bring out the worst wine at the end, but this wedding has the good stuff at the end. The only reason that was a tradition is because, as you might know if you've been drinking, the longer you drink and the drunker you get, the less you care about the quality. Right.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Like,
Yep.
there's a reason that when I get like a variety pack of some kind of alcoholic beverage, I save the ones that I like the least for the latest point in the drinking.
Mhm.
We got a for $4.99 from Vandalia 1998. The reason the U.S. got less slaves than South America was only because they survived long enough to have kids, which is a whole other can of worms. It's not the only reason, but it is a factor. Yes, for various reasons, the reasons that are now the United States had a easier time keeping slave populations going in what you might call natural ways, in the sense that the slaves were just reproducing on their own, or in some cases were bred intentionally because eugenics is cool, I guess.
All that to say, setting the stage, there is a difference between what we had here in America and what was around the world and what the Bible's talking about. That
You
list
don't
laid it out.
say.
Eric, literally
don't
no
say.
one that I'm aware
But-
of is making the opposite argument.
You know,
Tell me more.
the differences are not what you think
Taking a
they
drink
are,
on this one, I can't.
Eric.
God.
Yeah, like I'm
Wow.
not aware of anyone going out there and saying American slavery was exactly the same as slavery in the ancient Near East. It's not an argument that I'm aware of anyone making because it's not true, and two, even if it were true, then what? So what? Who cares?
Yeah, it's so therefore what?
Right.
And Dr.
Basically,
Josh isn't. Therefore what?
yeah, virtually everything that Eric has
Mm-hmm.
said could be countered by just saying, therefore what? What do we draw from this? And the only thing he can do is he can say, well, I guess then slavery is okay as long as you're nicer than Americans were. Which, sorry, but no. And even
This
if
is
that
one of those
is their
things where-
argument, it still means the Bible endorses slavery. Because remember, Eric is saying the Bible doesn't endorse slavery. He's trying to make that point. And in order to do so, he's going with the argument, yeah, but the slavery was different. Well, then it still endorses slavery. It just endorses a different kind of slavery. And if you want to make the argument,
Well,
the
yeah,
Bible will be okay
and-
with a different kind of slavery than antebellum South slavery, I mean, okay, but I still don't want that kind of slavery either.
But also, like, if he's trying to die on this hill, let's just, submit him to the biblical slavery system and see how he likes it.
Yeah.
I doubt he would sign up for this.
And hey, as a non-Israelite, he would have to be owned permanently, or at least he could be owned permanently.
Correct.
So,
And I could, give him to my, fictional kids as an inheritance if I wanted.
well, that would be if he was your slave. Do you actually want a slave?
Well, my
Eric?
husband's slave.
Well, we'll presume that your husband has now died and you don't have any adult kids who could take over his estate, so you're in charge of the estate.
hmm
Or I guess maybe it would be his brother. Or new
His
husband.
brother, if he had any. Yeah.
More likely.
All right. Well, anyway, guys, we're towards the end of this. I am not positive if we're going to finish this video, since it seems like we have gotten basically all of their arguments out of the way at this point. I don't think anything new is coming. But I will confer with my panel as to whether or not they would be interested in finishing it. Personally, I think we've covered everything Eric is going to show us. That is, we've got his arguments. It wasn't that bad in the first place, apparently. Even if it was, American slavery was worse. And basically just conflating debt slavery with chattel slavery, both of which occur in the Bible as separate categories, and both of which need to be dealt with. So yeah, I'm not positive.
But somehow American slavery wasn't so bad either.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. Joshua Geese also just gets a membership. Thank you very much. So here's what's up. Shanti, what do you have coming up that you want people to know about?
I'll announce it on my community page.
And Joshua Geese just gets another membership, so let's take a couple drinks there. Kip, what do you have coming up?
Not a lot, actually. So Josh and I will be continuing to read through Exodus 1 in Hebrew on Thursday evening. So this isn't a YouTube thing, but I am going to be on Wednesday. I'm going to be interviewing and chatting with a French documentary company who's making a film about Dead Sea Scrolls forgeries. So that's fun. And then
Wait.
yeah.
Mais tu ne parles pas français.
Well, they'll interview me in English, thankfully. One more thing I want to say I'm pretty excited about. Josh and I are currently working on a script with Apologia. And this will be in response to a terrible, but funny and terrible video that Firing Philosophy and Gavin Ortland made together about the Canaanite conquest. And the script is fire, guys.
Awesome.
It is fire. I've seen a very tiny segment
really
of it. It's fire.
All right. Well, let's see what's coming up on this channel. Today is Saturday, so on Tuesday we're going to be having Kent with Bent. It's going to be called Snake Murderer. Kent with Bent 140, because yes, in fact, Kent Hovind is now a snake murderer. Remember, hey guys, if you decide to purposefully pick up a snake and it bites you, that's your fault. That snake did nothing wrong. It did not ask to be picked up. You did that.
It's just doing what snakes do.
Right. Look, if some giant picked you up, you'd probably fight back too. This
was a non-consensual intrusion.
Exactly. Oh, and Regios just gifted the membership.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Regios.
When went to Bob Knob.
Yeah,
not Jillian. Dang it.
Jillian will get there. I have faith. Also, there's a grace period on the server. I think it's like 2 weeks or something. So Jillian has a little while to get there. So that is on Tuesday. On Thursday, we are going to be looking at the final video in the Pam Acker series. What is fitness? Because Pam Acker, along with many creationists, does not understand what it means for a trait to be a fitness enhancing or a fitness decreasing trait in evolutionary biology. She conflates it with things like the fit person is the one who would go win the strongest man in the world contest, which is not what it means in evolutionary biology. It is not the kind of thing you go to the gym to get. Then on Saturday, I am planning another Dapper Reacts. Like I said, I am not positive. I have another video after this lined up. I did talk about this last time. It is, in fact, a Young Earth creationist talk given to a Cree TV station that apparently also has a YouTube channel that's based in Saskatchewan. And so this channel has... Yes, so this channel that is run by the Cree has... a lot of their content is just random church services, but they also have some music in Cree, which I find interesting. I like the idea that people are still producing new music in the Cree language, because that is an important aspect of language preservation. So good on them. I don't have everything negative to say about this group of people, right, who are doing this channel. They have some good stuff on there that I want them to do more of. But they also have this, which is a Young Earth creationist just lying to the entire Cree people, as near as I can tell, on this channel. And so I'm not okay with that. I want to talk about it. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's like I have mixed feelings about this channel. It's called like tribal traits, because on the one hand, new music in a relatively endangered language, which Cree is not the most endangered of, like, you know, Native American languages, but it's not exactly going as well as English is. So any new material in that language is a good thing in my book. But also, Regios just gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. I am out of my drink, so unfortunately I can't drink for them, but thank you very much. So that's what's on Saturday.
The worst thing about Saskatchewan... I was just going to say the worst thing about Saskatchewan is all the goddamn Rough Riders.
I will take your word for that. I have never actually been to Saskatchewan. Actually, to think about it, I think the only provinces I've been to are Quebec and British Columbia. I don't think I've been anywhere else.
Which one's right across the river from Detroit?
Isn't that Ontario?
Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the only one I've been to.
I'd like to go to Ontario. I have friends in Ontario. But also,
Ontario's big.
Yeah.
Bigger than Texas.
All the provinces are big, though. Well, okay, not all of them. I guess there's like...
but, I mean,
Newfoundland
Ontario's
is not that big.
really big.
Isn't Prince Edward Island like its own
Prince Edward
province?
Island is not, it's not very big either.
Yeah,
it's tiny.
Most of the provinces are much bigger than most of the states.
But I think
in the United
that one
States.
might be bigger than Rhode Island.
Well, Rhode Island is basically like 2 cities.
To be fair, yeah.
All right, we got another super chat to read. Let's see. Roshna out of all over Keller for $1.99 says, next time each drink is a shot of Everclear. No, because then I would just die. Look, we just got 71 drinks.
It's not trying to die.
I would. That's over 140 drinks of alcohol. I would literally be dead. Before that, have you ever had a shot of Everclear? Because I have. It is not a fun time.
Yeah.
It is miserable.
One time.
Yeah,
that was enough.
Exactly. One time. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. If you are interested, over on the Discord server in just a few minutes, we will be watching 4 episodes of Power Rangers SPD. It's basically not quite the last 4. We only have 2 after this, though, so we're near the end of that one. Feel free to come and hang out for that if you want to. If you don't, that's fine too. I will be putting up a poll later on asking what fancy new avatar to use, because we got 130% of the way to having a new avatar. Thank you so much, everybody. Well, a fancy avatar like we have in the past. I Do What I Want will be on there, but there's also probably going to be like the Mickey Mouse avatar, Clay Dapper, and then like one other. And that'll be on the next video I make. So with that, everybody, stay safe out there. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And hey, don't do pro-slavery apologetics. It's never a good look. All right, bye, everybody. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members. Dr. Tapioca Weasel, Alaround Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostick Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babbity, Sphincter of Doom, and Ballus. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.